China's influence over international organizations is growing, and that could spell trouble in the South China Sea. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This year it has become painfully apparent how much influence the Chinese Communist Party has over international organizations like the UN. The World Health Organization, for instance, said they would investigate the origin of the coronavirus. But they did not actually travel to Wuhan, the origin of the coronavirus. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, an iceberg that may sink the world. Over the past several years, Beijing has systematically positioned Chinese nationals at the head of a wide range of UN agencies. Earlier this year, China was appointed to an influential UN Human Rights Council panel. Perfect! The Chinese Communist Party's experience with concentration camps and genocide gives them the kind of insight the Human Rights panel really needs. Speaking of human rights, a whistleblower has accused the UN Human Rights Office of helping China keep an eye on dissidents. She says the office gives Chinese officials a list of human rights activists who plan to attend UN meetings ahead of time. I don't see the problem. It's just more efficient. Why try to rebut the arguments of these human rights activists when you can just target them ahead of time and stop them from speaking in the first place? China currently leads 4 of 15 UN specialized agencies. Don't worry, it didn't get that 5th one. But even with 4, they've been able to do a lot. Chu Dongyu leads the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. He used to be China's Vice Minister of Agriculture. So, a Chinese national is head of the UN Food and Agricultural Agency. So what? Well, in 2016, the Food and Agriculture Organization and China further entered into a new era of collaboration to foster innovation, synergies, and complementarities, whatever those are, in the realization of China's national development goals, in line with the Belt and Road Initiative. Yes, China's Belt and Road Initiative, the one that takes resources from developing countries and leads them into debt traps. Definitely an important mission for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. And that's just one UN agency. Zhao Hoilin leads the UN's International Telecommunication Union. Zhao began in China's Ministry of Posts and Telecommunications and has used his position to advocate for Huawei as the world's vendor of 5G telecommunications equipment. Huawei, of course, is the Chinese telecom company that the U.S. has designated a national security threat. Liu Jianmin holds a key position in the UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs, which is supposed to fight climate change and reduce inequality. And since China is a world leader in both air carbon emissions and income inequality, who better to be involved? And finally, Fang Liu heads the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization. It's been accused of keeping Taiwan out of the loop about the coronavirus. And this issue isn't limited to the UN. It's a problem with other international bodies too. Remember when China's representative Meng Hongwei was elected president of Interpol back in 2016? Everything was going great until Meng mysteriously vanished on a trip to China 2 years later, and then was sentenced to 13 years in prison for corruption earlier this year. But I'm sure that's just a one-off freak occurrence that will never happen again. Apparently, China's growing influence is not something international organizations are worried about, because last month, Chinese national Duan Zhelong was elected to serve a 9-year term as a judge on the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea to oversee maritime disputes, which China, again, should know a thing or two about, because it claims the entire South China Sea and is involved in maritime disputes with all its neighbors. The tribunal was formed according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but it's not a UN agency. Duan will be the second Chinese judge currently sitting on the tribunal. Now, China hasn't had the best luck so far with maritime tribunals, because 4 years ago, a different tribunal, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, rejected China's claims in the South China Sea. I know it's confusing, there's too many tribunals. Anyway, Beijing responded by rejecting the Permanent Court of Arbitration's ruling. And my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, wrote at that time that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea has no jurisdiction over territorial disputes. But maybe China will decide to try its luck now with this new tribunal, once they get more control over it. The U.S. had objected strongly to adding another Chinese judge to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. Assistant Secretary of State David Stilwell even said, electing a PRC official to this body is like hiring an arsonist to help run the fire department. But I guess the tribunal is not worried about burning down the house. Now, it's interesting that this tribunal has not yet judged any cases that relate to the South China Sea. But the Chinese Communist Party doesn't mind playing the long game. It spent decades expanding its influence in the UN and other international bodies. It buys off certain countries, especially developing countries, by offering them money or providing them financial assistance, such as canceling their debts. In exchange, these countries voice support for China on the international stage. For example, Hungary. I bring it up because Duan Zheilong was actually China's ambassador to Hungary. By 2017, China had invested over $4 billion there. That year, Hungary prevented the European Union from adding its name to a joint letter expressing concern about reports of lawyers in China being tortured in detention. So I can't wait to see what China can do with this tribunal and the South China Sea. And now it's time for me to answer a question from one of you who supports China Uncensored through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Somchai asks, can China make their RMB stronger so the U.S. sanction will not affect them? Good question, Somchai. So this is in reference to the U.S. sanctions on Chinese officials who cracked down on Hong Kong, as well as Chinese companies. Broadly speaking, the way these sanctions work is they stop U.S. companies, like banks, from doing business with these people and companies. So it doesn't matter how much China changes the value of the RMB, these sanctioned people and companies will have a hard time doing any kind of business internationally. It's a very clever way to do sanctions, because U.S. banks are the ones that have to actually implement them or else risk getting into big trouble. There's not much the CCP can do about it. And they may not even try to do much because the U.S. didn't go after all CCP officials, just specific ones. And since Xi Jinping isn't personally affected, he may choose not to fight this battle. Thanks for your question, Somchai. You too can support China Uncensored and help us keep making episodes like this. Visit patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.